On January 28, 1969, in Santa Barbara, an estimated 3 million gallons of crude oil spewed 5 miles off the coast into the Pacific Ocean. This created a 35-mile-long oil slick along California's coast, killing thousands of birds, fish, and sea animals, as well as severely impacting the coast for years. After the oil spill, this region became ground zero for some of the most significant conservation efforts of the 20th century.
The oil spill was caused by Union Oil Rig A that ruptured off the coast. Before the rig was built, the company obtained a waiver from the U.S. Geological Survey that granted them permission to build a protective casing around the drilling hole that was 61 feet shorter than the federal minimum at the time, which was 300 feet. This inadequate 239 feet is what is known to have caused this massive spill. The resulting explosion from the rig was so powerful it cracked the seafloor in 5 places. Crude oil began spewing out of the rupture at a rate of 1,000 gallons an hour for a month before it could be slowed. Residents recalled the overwhelming smell of tar in the air as well as not being able to hear the breaks of waves due to this thick oil.
With animals in mind, the spill caused an estimated 9,000 birds, more than 14 tons of surf grass, and 9 million barnacles to die. The oil also suffocated dolphins and seals that were in the area. A team of California tech engineers reported that along certain stretches of the California coast, all the barnacles, mussels, limpets, and periwinkles had perished. The count of birds found by official California Department of Fish and Game was about 3,700, although more is speculated to have died and sunk in the ocean, thus not washing ashore. If birds would come out of the water, they would try to clean their feathers off, and they'd ingest the oil. People tried helping pick them up and put them in boxes and took them to a cleaning station. There were thousands of birds taken to these cleaning stations, but not one was saved.
Even animals that didn't die because of the spill were greatly affected. Biologist Dan Strahan studied the organisms affected and concluded that half the mussel and barnacle species reproduced less than they had prior to the oil spill. New barnacles were also less likely to settle on rocks with dried oil on them. This means that they were less likely to come and live on oiled beaches altogether. Sea lions on the San Miguel Island were extremely affected in the way that the pups could not suckle their mothers because the mothers would have tar on their tummy, which ultimately killed the pups. While cleaning the spilt oil, the Union Oil Company of California blasted rocky beaches and pier areas with water, steam, and sand. One contractor used a slurry of chemicals including talc and naphtha to dissolve the oil. No one conducted studies of the effects these procedures had on animals living on the rocks. However, UC Santa Barbara biologists have stated it is reasonable to assume that the procedures used to remove dry oil from solid substrates will also remove and possibly kill attached organisms. One team of researchers estimated that the steam cleaning killed 60% of mussels inhabiting the area. Cleanup crews working in Santa Barbara Harbor tried to soak up the thick deposits of oil with straw, which was thrown on top of the oil.
The public outrage was very prominent in Santa Barbara. Americans were sickened by the images of oil-drenched birds that couldn't fly, sea otters that couldn't swim, and tides that brought in the corpses of dead seals and dolphins. In addition, fueling this outrage even further was a comment by a top oil company executive who said, quote, "I am amazed by the publicity for the loss of a few birds," end quote. For a short while, the blame for the oil spill landed on the major players in court. However, the spill initiated a decade of unprecedented environmental legislation. Offshore drilling soon became one of the most heavily regulated industries in California. And nationally, hundreds of laws were enacted to preserve everything from coastlines to endangered species.
On March 21, 1969, nearly 2 months after the blowout, newly sworn-in President Richard Nixon came to Santa Barbara as the cleanup efforts were underway. He visited a mostly cleaned-up beach in Santa Barbara along with an entourage of reporters. Nixon stated, quote, "This problem is bigger than just Santa Barbara. We need more effective control to protect our beauty and natural resources. I don't think we've paid enough attention to this." End quote. In the aftermath of the spill, President Richard Nixon signed the National Environmental Policy Act in 1969, which requires environmental impact reports. The California Environmental Quality Act was adopted in the following year. For the next 3 years after the spill, the California State Lands Commission placed a temporary ban on all new offshore drilling in state waters, as well as for existing leases. The federal suspension has effectively banned new offshore drilling in federal waters off California for decades. Today, there are only 23 offshore oil and gas leases in state waters. After the disaster, new federal policies required offshore oil platform operators to pay an unlimited amount towards oil spill cleanup costs, along with the penalties up to $35 million.
The idea for a national day to focus on the environment came to Earth Day founder and U.S. Senator of Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, after witnessing the ravages of the oil spill. He believed he could infuse the energy from students' anti-war movement with the emerging public concern about air and water pollution. Therefore, it would force environmental protection onto the national political agenda. On April 22, 1970, 20 million Americans took to the streets, parks, and auditoriums to demonstrate for a healthy, sustainable environment in massive coast-to-coast rallies. Thousands of colleges and universities organized protests against the deterioration of the environment. The first Earth Day had led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of the Clean Air, Clean Water, and Endangered Species Act. These laws and organizations have helped preserve the coast from disasters like these for years to come.